Welcome to Let's Talk Death, conversations to inform and inspire. Let's Talk Death is a series of conversations with some amazing people from various fields. Our goal through these conversations is to normalize, educate, and demystify the taboo around death, dying, and the journey of grief. Hello, welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Fran Solomon.
And I'm Andy McNeil.
And we are thrilled to be your hosts for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network, creating community after someone has died. Everything we do is inspired by our core belief that no one should ever grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people so we can help normalize and educate our Heal Grief community. Our guest today is Dr. Tara Ferriola. Dr. Ferriola is a licensed clinical psychologist who provides compassionate therapy to children, adolescents, adults, and families. Dr. Ferriola incorporates grief concepts into her work with clients as they experience loss, transitions, and death. She has over 15 years of experience clinically and through volunteer work with Camp Erin. Dr. Ferriola is also an author. She dedicated her dissertation work creating the Love Legacy Guidebook. Based on research, the book helps families through a parent's illness and death by providing interactive activities to maintain connections, continue to the parent's memories after death, and to ease the transitions. The book aims to promote healthy grieving before a parent dies. Tara, we are delighted to have you as a guest on our show.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So Tara, before we speak about your work, let me ask you, was there a death loss that perhaps shaped your interest in the career path and the focus of your grief work?
Sort of. So when I was little, my grandmother died when I was 9. And one of the things I realized that I wish I had was memories and connections. You know, as I got older, I realized that a lot of that stuff became fleeting as new memories and experience popped in my head. So it's actually interesting because it's something I incorporate in my work now, is really trying to capture some of those tangible and intangible experiences with family members that are going through a death. But when I wrote my dissertation, I just found in my studies in graduate school that I really was drawn to grief. I, for lack of a better word, felt excited to work in this field. And that's how I got started with Camp Erin. And I had done a few internships working with bereaved children. And I found that there was a missing piece of the anticipatory grief work. But interestingly for me, I almost feel like life imitated art for me. 2 years after I completed my dissertation, my mom had died after about a year's battle with cancer. So I was like, wow, this dissertation work and prep that I have done, I get to put into place. And I know my book is mostly for children, but I found it to be really helpful for me in capturing some of those memories. So I got to use that with my mom before she passed, which I thought was so invaluable for me. Thought it was really cool timing that I had done the work not too long before that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It is interesting how when we have our own personal experience too, and we're working on something at the same time, and how those sometimes can interface, and we even come out of it with maybe not completely different perspective, but a new perspective, a fresh perspective. Yeah.
And I love how you say that although it was meant for children, it really worked for yourself. I think that holds true with a lot of things. We might mature the exercise or the activity, but the activity itself, the principles behind the activity, I think are really remarkable healers and connectors to our person. Tell us about some of those.
Yeah, so one of the things I had done with my mom's input was write down a lot of our shared memories together. And I kind of did it on little strips, and I got to put it in a jar, and at any point I get to look at it. talking about anniversaries or birthdays, what would be important for her. I had not been married at the time, so thinking about ways we can incorporate her into my wedding, knowing that it would happen one day. And so one of the things we didn't get to do, which I'm really kind of sad about, is write letters. So one of the things in the guidebook is to have the parent write letters for future events. And for lots of different reasons, we didn't get to do that. And I feel like that would have been a really valuable and important aspect for me on my wedding day, to have a letter from her a few years after her passing. But we did get to do a bunch of different conversations about, her life. And I think that was part of what I wrote down too, was certain memories that I might have forgotten just throughout the course of me living. So it's really interesting way for me to process her death. And I think for her to know that she was leaving this legacy behind with me is so valuable for us.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about the letter writing, because one of the activities we encourage is not only that individuals that are grieving write that letter to their person, but then we take a step further and we say, okay, now have your person respond to you. And what would that look like? And we, like you with that smile, we find that a lot of people, although it's a very emotional thing to do, end up with that smile.
Yeah.
These are some of the things that we're talking about here. I wonder, and I know in my case, when my mom died, she had unfinished, crochet work and blankets on and things like that. It just made me think. I've thought for years how great it would be if, when a parent has a new baby and they're coming home and they send you maybe home with 5 diapers and some wipes and some, whatever they have in the little packet. If part of the packet was, and here's a writing packet. Write a letter to your child when they're one, because it seems like so often we're thinking about it when time is fleeting, as opposed to those moments when everything seems to be okay, right? But maybe, how can I do that? And I've always gone around in my mind, how do we do that? How do we get families to think that way when someone's not ill, right? And what would this look like?
Yeah, maintaining connections throughout life. Yeah, I think that's amazing. I love that idea. It makes me sad that not many places think about those things from the start.
Yeah, very much so. So you mentioned that you noticed that there wasn't a lot of work around that pre-death grief experience, and wanting to really do some stuff to fill that space. Are there other things? I know there's things like being prepared and that type of thing. Are there other things that you noticed about that prior to that maybe we miss opportunities there?
I think it kind of goes along with what you were saying, is that we think about these things only when the illness is presenting itself. And so I think one of the healthy parts about relationships is establishing those connections along the way, and not just after the fact, because I think grief is so, such a big emotion. It's so, it varies day to day, hour to hour, that I think sometimes, grief can get in the way of doing some of those things that would have been valuable. And at the time when I wrote my dissertation, I was still in graduate school, so a lot of it was based off of, talking with my supervisors at the time or fellow volunteers at Camp Erin, and noticing that, it was so important at those moments to have pictures, to have memories, to have objects. And I thought, how amazing would it be to start that process beforehand with parents' input, so that to me, it makes it extra special to know, like, my mom said that this shirt was so important to her, and now I get to hold on to it and knowing it was important to her.
Yeah, it's interesting. When my mom died, it was like going through things that had meaning to her, but no connection to me.
Right.
And so many memories, I'm sure, were lost in that just because they weren't passed on to me. So that's a really great point. Really great point. Your work with Camp Erin, were you actually in the trenches volunteering?
Yeah, so my first year I was kind of like a gopher, I guess. I was helping out in different ways, but then the next few years I was in I was with campers living in I'll call them the dorms, and it was so amazing. Camp Erin is less than 48 hours, and the change from entry to departure was magical. And as volunteers, we'd always say we felt like we got more out of it than the kids might have because of getting to bear witness to their grieving process. So yeah, I was in the trenches, and then once I knew my mom was sick, I had to put that on pause because I wasn't sure if that would be a good fit for me at that moment.
Sure. I'll share my favorite Camp Erin story because I too had volunteered for them years ago. And one of the beautiful things about Camp Erin is anyone who is grieving, which is the qualifier, can attend. And so here in Los Angeles, we had the bus go around and pick up the kids, and there was this one girl from the underserved community who, barely had a bag together with all her things. And then another girl at another stop came on with her 2 little Louis Vuitton backpacks. And at the end of the 48 hours, they both left with a Louis Vuitton backpack.
Oh,
yeah, it was beautiful. And actually that was the start of Camp Erin creating backpacks for all the kids. So there was no kind of disconnect with who, what background one might come from. But I thought that was a beautiful story and so heartwarming. These 2 young girls from totally different walks of life connected over this thing called grief, the death of their person.
Yeah, I think Camp Erin does a really good job of bringing comfort to grief. So, a lot of kids ask the volunteers, have you ever experienced the death of someone? And I think that's so bonding. And then, they have the blankets and the bears, and there's just so many ways to connect to the experience of Camp Erin too, which again is so magical to me because
Is there
really makes it tangible.
Is there any one particular story that just stands out for you?
Oh, you're making me think back a few years now. One cute story was during the luminary ceremony, a kid, they offered kids to share their person who had died, and I thought this was adorable that a kid said, "My cat." Everyone was saying, and I think he was there for a grandmother, but it just shows the difficulties of grief that he was like, I'm just going to keep it safe and tell everyone it was my cat. And it kind of broke up a little bit the intensity of the moment, and everyone kind of found that to be so sweet. But yeah, I've had a few girls in my cabin who it was really tough and emotional for them to be there at first, to separate, of course, from their parent, especially after a loss. That can be really tough, and to witness them comfort one another, to really see some kids who might have been more outgoing take those kids who are a little bit more shy under their wings, and embrace them. And I feel like Camp Erin does a really great job of allowing grief to be experienced verbally, through connections, through music, and sometimes just in those quiet moments at the end of the day where everyone's in their cabin, and how wonderful that they get to talk about that person. So I think sometimes society doesn't always allow that. It kind of shushes kids when it comes to grief. They get a chance to talk about it.
Was your research also focused on what your experience was there, or had you already done your research and you were implementing it there?
There meaning Camp Erin, or the book?
Yes, I'm sorry. There meaning Camp Erin. The
Camp Erin
research for the book. So you got a lot of your research from Camp Erin.
Yes, yeah, very inspired by Camp Erin. That was my early part of my graduate career, and then once doing the research, it was really fascinating to me to say, yeah, there's the memory board. that makes sense that when they do this moment of getting to share the person that they died, they're maintaining connections this way, or you know, at night when we get to talk about that person, they're really getting to share their story, which is so valuable to me. So it was really fascinating for me to then put that into the book to see, you know, I'm sure that's where they pulled a lot of it from for Camp Erin too.
Well, Tara, we only have a few minutes left. If someone's listening to the episode and they want to know how to connect with you or your work or your book, how would they go about doing that?
So the book is available on Amazon. I say it's easier to just type my name into Amazon, and for some reason when you type in Love Legacy, a bunch of things pop up. So Tara, and then my last name is F as in Frank, Erriola. And my website is drtaraferriola.com. So that's probably the best two ways to connect.
Wonderful. Tara, we'll have that on our website.
Thank you.
Make it easier for our listeners to find you. And we want to thank you so much for being a guest here at Let's Talk Death and for sharing your inspiration behind your book and the story of your mom.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to those who are joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Death. If you would like to learn more about Heal Grief, please visit us at healgrief.org. At healgrief.org, you can learn more about all of the programs and resources of Heal Grief, including our national network of support for grieving young adults. It's a program called Actively Moving Forward.
And if you know of a bereaved adult, refer them to our AMF app, where adults of all ages connect with others experiencing a similar death loss. And last, make sure you sign up on healgrief.org to receive our newsletters to future episodes of Let's Talk Death.
And so with that, again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Let's Talk Death.